There are games out there where you play as heroes with mythic status, like God of War. And then there are games where you play as normal people, like Guy Next Door. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, the 10 best RPGs where you play as a nobody. Starting off with number 10, the Elder Scrolls series. Unlike most RPGs, the Elder Scrolls usually starts off relatively mundane. They always begin in a similar way, with your character being a criminal for some unnamed crime, which means that you usually start out with absolutely nothing. Eventually, you find out you're the chosen one in these stories. In Morrowind, you're the Nerevarine. In Skyrim, you're the Dragonborn. But at first, you're just a total nobody with no respect in the world. That's a little less true in Oblivion, where the first few minutes you meet the king. He tells you he saw you in a dream and that you're very important. Then he dies. That game doesn't quite fit what we're talking about as much as the others, but I mean, he does die. Still, you can play these games for a hell of a long time without getting the main quest. In fact, that's exactly what a lot of people do. They just screw around in the world and never touch the main story. If you do that, you'll basically remain a nobody in the eyes of the game. Maybe a filthy rich nobody, but a nobody nonetheless. The Elder Scrolls doesn't exactly make you feel like a nobody, though. You can hack and slash it with through pretty much anything, as long as you don't crank up the difficulty, but they fit the description just enough that we're giving them a spot at number 10. Number 9 is Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord. Lord is right there in the title, and a big part of the game is becoming a proper lord with a castle and subjects, where you can lead entire armies and be a huge power in the world of the game. But that's just one of the things that you can do in this sandbox RPG. Sure, you can start off as a noble when you're creating your character, but if you want, you can just as easily be a low-born peasant with a few useful skills. Instead of building up your renown and prestige with the local lords, you can become a bandit and pillage villages. You can rob caravans or just fight it out with other bandits. Because of how open-ended the game is, you can pretty much live your life however you want. It pretty much has to involve combat though, but outside that, it's pretty easy and pretty fun to just roll around the world with your gang of bandits just trying to get by. Not exactly glorious, but it is a lot of fun. And number 8 is Final Fantasy XII. Usually in a Final Fantasy game, the main character basically drives the plot. Like with Final Fantasy X, you got Titus, 4, Cecil, 13 with Lightning. Story revolves around them, not the other way around. Obviously, this isn't always the case, like with Terra from 6, for example, but she's still important to the narrative, even if that game is about the group more than it is about any one character. With 12, though, the main character is pretty much just a nobody. Vaughn is the brother to the character you play as during the prologue, but that's pretty much it. He is not the prologue. He remains secondary for basically the entire story. The real main character is arguably either Bosch or Ash. They're the ones that make most of the decisions in the game, not Vaughn. So yeah, the party basically does the whole Final Fantasy thing and becomes world-saving heroes at the end, but the supposed main character of the game is really kind of just a tag-along. It's kind of an interesting subversion of RPG tropes if you think about it, but it's also kind of funny. He's the main character that isn't, basically. A friend of the hero. I didn't save the world, but my best bud did. And number 7 is Fallout New Vegas. Most Fallout games don't start out with you being some chosen one, usually just somebody who lived in a vault and got sent out to do something. It's usually something important, but you're not uniquely equipped to deal with it in the wasteland or anything. Pretty much anybody could go out and do it, it's just you that is. Even in comparison to other Fallout games though, the character you play as in New Vegas is Small Potato. They are a courier, that is pretty much it. They deliver packages, they are a UPS man, but obviously in Fallout, so it's not the UPS, just the unnamed courier. Other Fallout heroes are called the Vault Dweller and the Lone Wanderer, but everyone in this game just calls you the courier, which is not particularly dignified. And just like the Elder Scrolls series, you can go through the game doing basically nothing important. You don't have to get involved in the New California Republic versus Caesar's Legion plot at all if you don't want to. Going through the main story, you'll eventually have to pick a side, but like those other games, it's really easy to ignore it if you don't want to bother with it. You're free to wander the wasteland and do whatever you want, and at least at first, the only real plot hook that's guiding you along is the dude that shot you is in New Vegas. Maybe role-playing and a live and let live type, sure, some dude shot me and stole my package, but whatever, it's a tough world out there, man. And number 6 is Shenmue, the first one. When it comes to games where you really feel like a nobody, Shenmue really captures that vibe. There's a very slice-of-life feeling to the game, even though the actual plot is about as melodramatic as it can possibly be. Like, you know, the bad guys that kill your father, you swear revenge and begin hunting them down. Sounds like a thriller plot, but the actual gameplay is a lot more chill. Most of your time in Shenmue is spent wandering around this cozy Japanese town, chatting up townsfolk, feeding cats, and collecting little capsule toys. Like, you You swear revenge for your father's death, and then you just start like hanging out with the chillest of chill vibes. Combat is a part of the game, but it takes a super long time to get to it, and it is never the focus. Creating a believable and lived-in world was what the developers were really interested in, and to this day, it remains a really unique game that gives you the feeling of being a normal dude in 1980s Japan who really wants to avenge his father, but only after spending his allowance on arcade games and driving a forklift and like collecting a lot of stuff. The later games of the series really upped the stakes considerably, but the first game really stands out for how much of a nobody it can really make you feel like sometimes. And number 5 is South Park: The Stick of Truth. Now, here's a game where you really are a nobody. You don't play as one of the main kids from South Park. Either you're new kid, douchebag, or buttlord. Like, they call you those things. It doesn't really matter what you put as your name. They just call you that.
You entered douchebag, is that correct? Are you sure you want to keep the name douchebag? Very well, douchebag.
And what you're doing really doesn't matter either. The game is just entirely just kids playing pretend. Of course, things get really out of hand in the usual South Park fashion, but at the end of the day, the whole quest for the Stick of Truth is totally made up and doesn't matter at all. Your main guy does have some unique powers that make them important to the story. They can use these fart techniques for some reason, and they make friends very easily. Yeah, that is your amazing superpower that makes you so important in the end. You can make friends easily. The whole thing just has the feeling of being pointless. And a lot of the humor comes from the fact that the kids are all taking it really seriously. When it comes to being a nobody in RPG, it's hard to top a small child who's LARPing with his friends. Not exactly a high-stakes situation. And number 4 is Gothic 1, a classic example of an RPG that just dumps you right into the deep end. Gothic is an infamously difficult RPG where you play as a guy dumped into a fantasy prison colony. Your role is actually important, like you're supposed to investigate what's going on behind this magic barrier that keeps all the prisoners locked in, but in every other way, the game just reinforces the fact you're a small fish in a big pond. You start out with basically nothing. You're not going to win any fights you get into at the start. Even the chumpiest looking creatures will take you down, and honestly, again, you're kind of just a chump at first. It doesn't help matters that the whole game takes place in a prison, basically, so almost everyone you meet is amoral and out for themselves. What seem like pretty standard quest givers are actually guys trying to trick you. People trying to get out of paying you for anything. Bandits lurk all over the place, waiting to rob you blind. It's treacherous and you can't trust anybody. And that's what made it so unique at the time, how player hostile it was. It makes up for a lot because even at the time, the game was kind of archaic and ugly looking, even at the best of times, and I've got to think that this would be a tough one to go back to these days. Still, it's one of the most unique fantasy RPGs out there, and there is a remake coming out in the future, so hopefully that'll be a decent way for people to experience this absolutely brutal game. And number 3 is Pathologic 2, another game that, while your role in the story is important, it makes you feel like a total chump most of the time. Pathologic 1 was one of those unique games ever, but to put it very mildly, was a little janky. On the other hand, Pathologic 2 is a lot more playable. It's got a lot of the weirdness from the original game, but with an actually playable game wrapped up in it. In the game, you play as a surgeon who's traveled to a strange and distant village to help with a mysterious plague. They don't really start you off too well. The game starts on day 12, and the town is almost completely devastated by the plague. It's only then does the game rewind you and start the story properly, but things don't exactly get any easier. You basically start the game with nothing, and you're forced to scrounge around in the trash to survive while gangs or roving locals attempt to beat you up wherever you go. The whole thing has this horrible, oppressive atmosphere where it makes you feel as if everything you do is pointless. It's grim, it's strange, all the way through, and it's totally worth checking out if you're okay with dealing with a little bit of that Euro jank. You're not exactly a nobody in this one, but few games make you feel as existentially pointless as this one. And number 2 is Kingdom Come Deliverance. This is the king of brutal RPGs. The world is harsh and dangerous, and there's death around every corner. Like a lot of games on this list, you're not a nobody, at least by the end, but it's pretty rare for an RPG to start the main character being the son of a blacksmith who can't even read. You're not exactly a peasant, but you're far from a lord at the beginning of the story. That changes eventually, but few games immerse you in the world like this one does. Yes, there are still a lot of bugs and weird issues, but if you want a game that makes you feel like just a random dude who's living in Bohemia in 1403 with all the good and the bad that comes with that, it's this one. Like I said, the combat is brutal, but you also have to eat, sleep, and carefully manage your stamina at all times. Nothing you do comes easily in the game either, whether it's crafting, fighting, or even just saving. Everything's harder to do than most games in a way that makes it feel just a little bit more authentic. It is a bit more of a linear game, not one where you can easily just do what you want like in Skyrim, so you can't really just be a nobody for the entire story. But few games out there make you really feel like a nobody in the way this one does, and it really immerses you in it. And finally, at number 1 is Kenshi. This has got to be the ultimate nobody game. Very few games let you just start out as a naked torso in the middle of a desert, and it gets worse from there. If you've heard of this one, then yeah, it's not much to look at. It was developed by a single dude. The game is a bizarre open-world RPG combined with some real-time strategy stuff. There's no story. You pretty much do whatever you want. If by that you mean get beaten up by bandits and then sold into slavery, because that's pretty much what's going to happen the first time you play this. The world is incredibly hostile and dangerous. Even if you don't choose to start as a totally useless pile of flesh, it's still an incredibly challenging game where you can lose everything from an instant right from the start. Eventually, it's possible to build entire outposts and command your own small army, but good luck getting there, because this game will beat you down at every available opportunity. This is a game where you're less than nobody. Nearly everyone's out to get you, and when you die, nobody will mourn you. If you're the type of person who plays games because you like to have fun and are looking for a power fantasy, then stay far away from this game. It is brutal, it is baffling, but it's also strangely compelling, and it's one of the most unique games in years, and it absolutely makes you feel like a nobody. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable all notifications, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at FalconHero. We'll see you next time, right here on gameranx.